Alrighty, welcome everyone into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. It is June 6th. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about NIL. The On3 Elite Series gave us some very interesting insights into how recruits look at NIL. Necessarily the way that you would think. So we'll break that down in the first segment. Then we'll get into a little bit of talk around the Hall of Fame. It sounds like the Hall of Fame is not necessarily doing what it's meant to do for college football, and I want to break down why that is and why we need to expand this a little bit in terms of just the number of people that get into the Hall of Fame every single year. But then we have a little bit of news out of North Carolina. It sounds like UNC and NC State might be forced to play Group of 5 teams like App State, Charlotte, East Carolina in the future, which I think would be a great move in this sport. And then we have a docuseries possibly coming to SEC that in 2024 would be an incredible thing to watch and definitely something that would give us a great thing to watch during the offseason. And then we have another Hot Take Thursday for you all, and we'll get to a little bit of talk around the Big 12 and how it is going to be an absolute battle out there, and I'm not sure that anyone comes out unscathed or anyone comes out with any less than 2 losses, frankly. So we'll break that down at the very end, but before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and I think that's always fun for the both of us. So if you want to use that, again, it's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in, and let's talk about this new development around the On3 Elite Series that was down in Nashville last week, and there were a lot of developments that came out of there. There were tons of recruiting rumors, definitely some interesting different things that came out, but the most interesting came out a couple of days ago, and it was in relation to NIL, and they did a survey of most of the 41 blue chip recruits that were down in Nashville this past week. About 36 of them actually opted in, and they got some very, very interesting feedback about how they view NIL, what their NIL deals look like, and what they're most worried about in the NIL world. So let's start to break that down for you all, and I think one of the biggest things here is a lot of people, when you're watching college football today, and especially when you're looking at recruiting, it's all about NIL. This idea has been thrown around that, all these players care about is how much money they can make at a specific college, and that's just the end-all be-all for them. It doesn't sound like that's that much of the case. There were 36 players surveyed. It sounds like the median is somewhere around $400,000 for these players. Now, keep in mind, these are the elite of the elite in the country, so this gives you an idea that it's never really, $1 million, $2 million on the table unless a school is, handling their business probably the wrong way. But it looks like it's, anywhere between $200,000 to $600,000. One of the guys even said he made the biggest offer that he found was $33,000, which is obviously much lower than you would expect for a blue chip recruit. But sometimes this NIL stuff doesn't work as well as you would like at some of the universities. Sometimes kids just don't have that ability to demand that money. So it's going to be really, really fascinating to see if that number shifts, if it goes down, if it goes up. You would assume it would go up with all of the changes that are going in, NIL just becoming more and more a part of the game. But it's a very, very interesting thing. And I think the biggest thing here is 22 recruits provided details on the amount of money they desired and kind of what they wanted in NIL going forward. And 12 said they would be more than content to take less than their largest offer. And I think that's probably the biggest point that I want to drill in on here, because although it's only 22 kids and 12 of them, it's not the biggest sample size in the world. We'd love to see a bigger sample size, and maybe it does change for 3 or 4 star recruits where you want a little bit more NIL money up front because maybe that NFL money isn't coming down the road, or at least not as sure it's coming down the road as some of these blue chip recruits. So it'll be fascinating to kind of watch this. I think it is a very, very good sign when you look at recruiting in NIL. There is going to be tons of people in the recruiting world that do care about NIL above all else. That's just the way of the world. There's always going to be those people out there. But the reality is, if we know that the elite of the elite are willing to, forego a little bit of NIL money because they know that this is the right culture fit, or it's going to develop me for the NFL better, or it's going to put me in a position to succeed on and off the field, all of those things are really encouraging signs for recruiting. Now, I'd love for that number to be a little bit higher than 50%, get that up into the 60s or 70s, but I do think that number might just continue to rise, if I'm being totally honest with you. I think kids are getting more and more, I suppose, hip to the fact that a lot of this stuff, a lot of the NIL money that you make, it's all well and good, and it's a great thing for kids to be able to make this money, and I think it's probably long overdue in college sports. But the reality is, not everyone is going to be able to make that type of money, and also, this money is now money. It's college money. It's the next couple of years, maybe, if you're very careful, you can use this over the next couple of years after college, but the real money is in the NFL. The generational money, the life-changing money, the money that makes you, be totally safe for likely the rest of your life if you're, very careful and not go crazy like some other people in the past have done with their NIL or their NFL makings. But the reality is, it feels like a lot of the players are becoming more aware of the fact that NIL is a great thing, and it's something that they absolutely should utilize. It's absolutely something that should factor into their decision. I just think it shows that it's not necessarily the top factor. It's not necessarily the end-all be-all that I think a lot of people might think it might be. So this is huge news. It's one of those things that all the people are so worried about NIL totally taking over the recruiting world, and it's just the highest bid. And for some of these kids, it will be. I'm not going to lie to you there. But I do think it's very encouraging that some of the best players in the country who are having put in front of them a lot of money, are willing to turn that down to, go to a place that makes them a little bit more comfortable, maybe makes them a little bit more money in the long run in the NFL. But one of the other interesting things they asked was, what was your biggest worry about the new NIL world, and kind of going into this with how are you going to talk to coaches and how are they going to treat you and that type of thing. And it all kind of went back to one thing. It all went back to, what if they lie to me? What if they, give me an idea of what I can make there and I don't actually get that? It's the Jaden Rashada way of things. In fact, one of the people literally wrote Jaden Rashada on the paper. So it gives you an idea of where these guys are coming from. They are a little bit scared. I think when you get into this new world, obviously, NIL and all of these kids being able to profit off their name is a good thing. I think most of us at this point pretty much agree on that, because for a long time they weren't able to, and they were kind of getting taken advantage. If you were to ask me, they were kind of getting taken advantage of. But I do think there are a lot of things that, you give all these kids this power and this ability to make money, and it's a great thing. But then you kind of also give the power to the coaches to possibly manipulate these kids. And I'm not necessarily throwing stones at the coaches or saying they're absolutely doing this to, aggressively by any means. But it is the reality of the sport. You want the best kids on your team. You want to get them kind of by any means necessary. And sometimes that will be lying. So one of the recruits said, people lying to me, saying numbers just to get me to commit. Those are big time worries, because you don't really know who to believe. I'm sure when Jaden Rashada was talking to those Florida people, he fully believed that they were going to follow through on that promise. And it is a two-way street. You do have to be careful if you're a recruit when you're talking to these people that maybe they don't have your best interests at heart. Maybe they do just want to get you on campus and have that paper signed and then have no intention of giving you the money that you're offered. So it is a little bit, fall on the recruit to figure out which is which and kind of discern where they should be, where they're comfortable, and kind of who's telling them the truth and who's not, I guess is the best way to put it. And I think it's one of those things where it does fall on the player to, at some extent, protect themselves. But also, the coaches and the recruiting people at every one of these universities is far more powerful in these discussions. I think we all fully understand that. They have the ability to, wield this, we are Ohio State, we are Georgia, we are Texas, whatever the scenario is, they're the ones in the place of power, because the reality is the recruit wants to play at some of these big time schools. They want to play at Ohio State. They want to play at Georgia. They want to play at Texas. So they have the ability to kind of do this from time to time. If you have a kid that really wants to play on your team but is looking for a little bit of NIL money, there's going to be coaches that are going to say something to make them sign and then have no intention of following through on that. And I think it's a huge worry for the future of college football. It's a huge worry for these recruits coming up, but it does show that these recruits know what the landscape looks like, and they at least, at the very least, are approaching it with some caution that I think in the past people just haven't. So when you look at this overall, there's always going to be kids that lean towards NIL, and some of that is out of just necessity, needing that money as quickly as possible for their family, for their livelihood, whatever that looks like. Also, some kids are going to do it because they want money. They feel like they're worth $1 million, $2 million, whatever that looks like. And frankly, I think those are the kids that you probably don't want in your program anyway. So it feels like this is becoming, NIL's getting to a place, I suppose, where kids want that money. They want to be in on those conversations. They absolutely want to be compensated, at least remotely fairly. But also, it feels like they're starting to understand that while NIL money is fantastic and it's a great way to get through college and get through it very comfortably, as we've seen in some other circumstances around college football, but it's now money. It's temporary money. It's the money that will get you through college and maybe a couple years after, but not much after that. And that's only if you're very, very careful about the way that you spend your money. Now, NFL money is generational. It can last you a lifetime. You get health benefits. You get retirement. There's so many things that come into play once you jump into the NFL from college football that isn't necessarily just a dollar amount on your paycheck. It's the amount that you're going to get after you retire. It's the amount that you get in healthcare and all of those different things that really, really matter, especially when you play a sport like football. So I think it's one of those things that kids are getting smarter. These recruits are starting to understand what the new landscape is, and they're starting to realize that while NIL looks really shiny and beautiful and definitely something that you want to at least get a piece of the pie of, it shouldn't be the end-all be-all, and it sounds like it's really not. Now, all of this is, a fairly small sample size, and we'll see kind of this develop over time, but to me, I think this number is only going to increase. I think there's going to be more and more kids that are less concerned about NIL going forward, because more and more kids are realizing that it's kind of a dangerous game you're playing if you're going into these conversations only with NIL on your mind. So it'll be fascinating to watch. I think, fit, in my opinion, is comfortably the most important thing for a recruit. If you are comfortable at a university, you're going to have a lot of success, especially with how talented some of these kids are. As long as you're comfortable, you're walking onto the practice field feeling the best you ever felt and, feeling really good about where you are, I think you're going to be okay. So it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch. I think all of this stuff is going to be really, really weird over the next little bit, but it feels like the players are starting to wise up to NIL is great, but it shouldn't be the decision maker, I suppose. But we're going to take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the Hall of Fame and how they have some problems on their hands, about the way that they go about business, about the number of people they let in per year, and a myriad of other stuff that we'll get to right after this. So stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the new developments in NIL and how some recruits are not as concerned about it as some other people might think, but let's jump into the Hall of Fame and let's talk about how it has a problem on its hands. I'll be totally honest with you. When the list came out a couple of days ago of the people eligible for the Hall of Fame, you're looking down the list and you're saying, man, about half of these people probably deserve to be in the College Football Hall of Fame, but only 12 can make it, and that is where my problem starts. Let's get into all the requirements that go into being in the College Football Hall of Fame, and a lot of them are normal, a lot of them are, make sense, some of them are outright ridiculous. So let's get into some of the different things that are going on, and I think one of the biggest things is players are one of the interesting things in college football where I get that, you want your best players in the College Football Hall of Fame. You want the guys that are first-team All-American selections, which is one of the requirements. You want, the big-time players that have cemented them into history, but it's not always what college football is about. I think there's a lot of players that haven't made a first-team All-American or, haven't done certain things on the football field that still mean a ton to college football. And I think using very, very strict monikers for what makes a player Hall of Fame worthy is kind of a dangerous slope. But also, the coaches one is the one that I really want to zero in on here. They have to be 3 full years after retirement unless they're 70 at the point of retirement. So Nick Saban was 70. He was able to get in this year. Active coaches have to be 75. I'm not sure if Bill Snyder was 75 when he was still coaching, but he has since gotten in and it absolutely deserves to be in. But also, the coach has to coach for at least a decade in college football. They have to coach at least 100 games and win at least 60% of them. So that's wild for a couple of reasons. Guys like Pete Carroll coached 9 seasons in college football. He should be in the Hall of Fame. I don't see any other argument for that. Mike Leach sits right below that 600 winning percentage mark with 596. There's no reality where you can't, bend the rules a little bit for someone like Mike Leach. So getting into all of this, it's been a little bit frustrating. I'll be totally honest with you. When I, get into a lot of these different type of, really get into the weeds of all this stuff, you realize how many people deserve to be in that Hall of Fame that are not right now. It starts with that man right there. The fact that Mike Leach is not in already is beyond crazy, but that's beside the point. I think there are a number of players that deserve to be in that for whatever reason are not. And let's start with Kellen Moore. He left his career as the NCAA leader in wins. He was second in touchdowns, 5th in passing yards when he left. He is one of the most defining players of the 2000s and brought a team like Boise State into the national conversation in a lot of ways. So the idea that he is not in there is just outright insane. Monty Ball had 39 touchdowns in a season, and I'm not joking. It is actually 39 touchdowns in a season. He tied the FBS record and took it from Barry Sanders to give you an idea of where he was up. Ran for over 2,000 yards in 2011. Did just incredible things while he was in college. Still holds the rushing record in the Big 12 for touchdowns and set both FBS records for finishing 13 consecutive games with 2 touchdowns. This kid was insane, and the idea that he is not in the Hall of Fame is absolutely out of this world. And finally, Simeon Rice, one of the guys that he went to Illinois a little bit back in the day, definitely a little bit of a throwback player, which makes it even crazier that he is not in this because he is the sack leader for the Big Ten all time. And he played a while ago. So there was plenty of time for people to overpass him in that, and no one has. He is one of the most defining, one of the most dominant players in the game, and the idea that that guy is not in those walls is just outright insane. He was one of the most dominant players. There he is right there. One of the most dominant players for a very long time. And then you have guys like Peter Warrick. You have guys like Garrison Hearst, Ken Dorsey. All of those guys not in the Hall of Fame. and you can't make an argument to me why they shouldn't be. It's insane. Like guys like Peter Warrick, Garrison Hurst, there's no question that those guys should absolutely be in that building. And in my eyes, when we look at other Hall of Fames and we look at, MLB, NFL, whatever sport you want to go to, there should be, certain monikers you got to pass because there's, not as much variability in the amount of talent on the field, and the teams aren't separated by huge margins. In college football, they are, which means that there's a lot of fantastic players. There's a lot of fantastic coaches that kind of drew the short end of the straw, where they had to play really good players, or it's a running back that was just absolutely remarkable throughout his career, but didn't make an All-American because he ran up against a couple other that were around him at the same exact time that should be in the Hall of Fame. So it's a flawed system. I'll be totally honest with you. Letting 12 guys in every year is way too few. When you have a sport that is so multiple, that is so different, that has so many names that define it every single year, the idea that we have, only 12 slots to fill is insane. There should never be a cap on how many people can make the Hall of Fame in a certain year, because not every year is the same in terms of how many people deserve it. So I don't want to be pushing guys into a 12 person cap when they don't deserve it, and vice versa. I don't want to cut out people that absolutely deserve it, but we can only have 12, so that's just the way of things. That's ridiculous, and that's not necessarily the way that a Hall of Fame should work. The way that the College Football Hall of Fame is meant to be, and the way it's meant to be in pretty much any sport, is showing what's special about that sport, showing the people, the coaches, everything in between that define that sport and make that sport special, leaving out guys like Monty Ball, leaving out guys like Simeon Rice, leaving out guys like Garrison Hurst, Kellen Moore, all of these guys. You're not doing that service. And I understand that some of these players aren't the most eye-popping players in the world, and they're not, they don't play at the biggest universities in the world. It shouldn't matter. College football is defined not by, Texas and Georgia and Bama. It's defined by the Toledos of the world, the Boise States of the world, the teams that take us by surprise, the teams that show up to work every day knowing that they're not going to get the coverage that the other guys do. And I think the idea that some of these people are being left out because I don't know why Kellen Moore is being left out, but I have to assume it has something to do with him going to Boise State, and that's insane. There's no reality where you can have a College Football Hall of Fame and leave out a huge sect of college football that makes it what it is, that makes it special, that makes it specific. And I think when you look at this Hall of Fame right now, I'd love to tell you that, it's a great place to go and get all of the history of college football. And to be honest, I've been there. It's a really, really fun atmosphere, and it's a lot of really, really cool things in there and some fun activities and everything. But as far as I'm concerned, it's not a Hall of Fame at this very moment. It's a cool museum. It's a very, very fun place to spend your day. That's all well and good, but it's not a Hall of Fame because you're leaving out players like Simeon Rice. You're leaving out players like Monty Ball. You're leaving out players that define this sport for so long. Peter Warrick was one of the most electric players that ever played this game. And the idea that he didn't make it his first time around, to be fair, is insane enough. But the fact that it's had to wait this long is just ridiculous. So something needs to change, whether that's the cap on 12 people. That has to change regardless of what we do going forward, because only letting 12 people into a Hall of Fame that, you have thousands of people coming out every single year from college football, that's outright insane. And there's so many different ways that I can kind of go about proving this, but the reality is the best example of why this is not a Hall of Fame, the best example of why this is not the way that a Hall of Fame should work and it's not honoring what the sport is about, is it doesn't have Mike Leach in it. I think we can all agree on that. Mike Leach is one of the most defining figures of the past 2 decades in college football, and it's because of what he did on the field, of course, with the spread offense at Texas Tech, and Graham Harrell and Michael Crabtree doing just incredible things on that team, and him kind of transforming modern college football, or it's just who he was off the field. That's what we all loved about him the most, I think. I mean, his play designs were absolutely insane, but I was waiting for that post-game interview, and I think a lot of you were as well. And that's part of college football. It's not always about what happens on the field. It's not always about the winning percentage. It's not always about, how long you were part of the game. Pete Carroll was here for 9 years, but he left a indelible mark on a university that is one of the biggest brands in all of college football. So it's broken. I'll put it that way. The system, the way it's going about, I don't know if it's the people in the room making the wrong decisions. Well, I know it's that in terms of guidelines, but I don't know if it's the wrong people, voting on this. I don't know if it's pure ignorance to some of the players that matter so much to college football, or it's just a little bit of laziness. I don't know what it is, but as far as I'm concerned, when we're looking at the College Football Hall of Fame right now, it's a fun museum. It's a really cool place to spend a Saturday, and that's about it. It's not a Hall of Fame. It's not, honoring what's special about college football. It's not, putting the proper spotlight on the people that we all love the most. So you can call yourself the College Football Hall of Fame as much as you want, but as of right now, you are a college football museum that has a couple of plaques in there from some very incredible people, but you're leaving out way too many. So there are plenty of examples of people that absolutely should be in that aren't, but the Hall of Fame's just off right now, and it can be fixed, and it's something that I think we're finally getting a good amount of momentum for it to be fixed, but as of right now, it's a very disappointing thing to look at, I suppose. But we'll take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about NC State and UNC. It seems like they might be pushed or forced, honestly, to play some of the group of 5 teams in their state, and I absolutely love it. So I'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the Hall of Fame and how it's not much of a Hall of Fame right now, if you were to ask me, but that's a conversation that I'm sure we'll get into down the road a little bit further. But let's talk about UNC and NC State. It sounds like there is a law going through the North Carolina legislation that seems to be forcing UNC and NC State to play some of the group of 5 teams in their state, and I absolutely love it. I'll be totally honest with you. When you look at college football today and you kind of break down what are people's biggest problems with it, what are people's biggest beefs with the way that college football is running, I think the number one is there's not enough regionality in this sport anymore. There's a lot of people, moving conferences. It doesn't necessarily, you don't have that, next door neighbor type hate that we all love in college football. And frankly, we need more of, which is actually a segment I'll likely do tomorrow, frankly. But it sounds like this bill will force the UNC and NC State to play teams like App State, Charlotte, ECU, all of those teams. They would be forced to play in a 6-year period. So they'd have to play a home and home with both these teams. And that is a very, very interesting proposition. Frankly, I absolutely love it. UNC and App State did not play too long ago. They set up a home and home in 2019, 2022, and 2023 last year. And UNC won 2 of those games, lost 1. So it gives you an idea that it's not necessarily going to be a cakewalk in some of these games, and I'm sure UNC and NC State are pushing for this to not be passed, but it sounds like it's really picking up steam, and hopefully it finds its way into, law, I suppose, which is kind of a weird thing to say about college football, but I do think this is going to be a great thing, and I think it's something that's super, super important to the future of college football. When you talk about, conference realignment and everything moving all over the place, and Washington having to play a game in Piscataway, New Jersey against Rutgers, all of that stuff is not great for the fans. Let's be totally honest. That travel, that ridiculous scheduling, it's not necessarily what you want. And also, you're not playing the teams that you used to play, that you grew to hate and definitely have a little bit of extra animosity towards. Those guys are now off your schedule. Now, you can kind of supplement that just a little bit, where I know NC State and, App State is not necessarily the most even matchup in the world, or NC State against Charlotte. Likely a lot of these games are going to go to UNC or NC State, but the reality is it keeps us in that kind of realm of you're playing the teams around you. You're getting that regionality. Maybe you have a neighbor that's a East Carolina fan while you're an NC State fan. You have to battle it out on a Saturday. I think that's part of what makes college football fun, and I think it's something that we've sort of started to lose over the last little bit, and this is a way to kind of not necessarily fully get it back, but at least kind of scrape it back as much as we can. And I think this is something that I hope happens across the board. Now, do I think a lot of these state legislations are going to get together to make that happen? I'm not necessarily sure. Now, the economic benefits would be huge for those states, so I don't necessarily think it's out of the question, but I do think this would be a great thing for college football just across the board, whether it's Georgia having to play Georgia State and Georgia Southern and Kennesaw State every couple of years, whether it's Ohio State having to play Ohio every couple of years, or Texas playing Texas State. It doesn't necessarily matter. All it is I love those in-state games, and whether it's a group of 5 against a power 5 or whatever that looks like, those in-state games just mean a little bit more. That's why, the Texas Tech rivalry was so aggressive, because there were so many people that were, neighbors or friends, or, they used to be friends in high school, maybe both went to different schools. All of this stuff kind of overlaps, and it makes it really, really fun on those Saturdays. And introducing that to North Carolina and to all of the fans out there, I think is a huge step forward. So it's one of those things that is going to be really, really fascinating to watch. I'm sure UNC and North Carolina State are pushing about as hard as you can to not play these games, because in particular, you do not want to go to App State. I can tell you that with absolute confidence. You do not want to play in that stadium. You do not want to play that team, because they're going to beat you a couple of times, and it's going to torpedo some of your seasons, and they definitely don't want that to happen. So it's going to be fascinating to watch this unfold, but the reality is this is college football. The NC State playing a App State, the in-state rivals are part of this sport and are what makes this sport special. So any way that we can implement this across the board, I am all for. Now, you would have to get a little bit creative, because there's not necessarily the same amount of group of 5 teams, the power 5 teams, and all of that jazz. But the reality is, it would be an incredible thing to see. And there would be so many incredible matchups that, yeah, maybe they're not even across the board. Getting App State for UNC and NC State is a little bit tougher than some of the other ones that could be out there, like Texas playing Texas State. But the reality is, these are really fun games, and they're going to be and they're going to be games that not only, matter on. They might not necessarily matter on a national scale. They might not necessarily be the games that get the prime time slot or anything crazy like that. But they will be games where UNC or NC State fans, or especially App State, Charlotte, ECU fans, wake up that Saturday just a little bit more excited and get to the, maybe get to the bar just a little bit earlier. And it's the essence of college football, I guess, is the best way to put this. These type of games are what makes college football special to me. These games that have passion behind them, not only on the field, but off the field, with a lot of the fans, knowing each other and overlapping and everything in between. So this is one of those proposals where it is a little wild that, the state legislation is coming in saying you have to schedule these schools, but it's something that, if it has to be done, it has to be done. And I think it would be a great thing for college football. It would give us games that we might, not necessarily be the most interested in going in, but a lot of these teams are going to get more interesting throughout time, especially if the roster cap, I suppose, is put in place in college football. the teams like App State, the teams like ECU, the teams like Charlotte are going to benefit from that because they're going to get some players that they wouldn't get in the past because they would find their way to Power 5 conferences no matter what. So these games are going to be incredible. And I really, really hope that this fully gets through everything and finds its way. But I think it would be incredible to watch across the country, whether it's, Kennesaw State fans would absolutely make the drive to Athens or Atlanta. App State fans would make the drive to Charlotte or Raleigh. It would make these games, these atmospheres, just that much more incredible. And there would be a little bit of animosity because maybe you weren't recruited by that team in state. Maybe you have a little animosity towards the coaching staff because of that. There is some energy behind these games that, they're not the sexiest games in the world when you look at them on the schedule, but for those players, they mean a lot. And I think they would mean a lot to a lot of fans and really would just be incredible to watch. So this is one of those rulings that I am all for. If, the government wants to get involved here, do the thing because this is absolutely a huge, huge step forward and definitely something that keeps the regionality alive, at least a little bit. It's not necessarily the games that we all want, and we're definitely losing some games that we need to get back on the docket. But the reality is being able to get as many in-state opponents as possible, I think is a great thing for the sport. And I think will only grow those games and will only grow those smaller universities that absolutely deserve a little bit more shine on those days. So I absolutely love this ruling. I think it's something that should be happening across the country, and I hope it does. I'm not sure it will, but it would be an incredible thing to watch, and I think even if it's just North Carolina, I would absolutely be locked in for those North Carolina App State games pretty much every time they happen. So that'll be incredible to watch. But we're going to take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a docu-series that could be coming to the SEC or could be coming to Netflix about the SEC in 2024. So we'll break down that and all of the storylines they have to look forward to in that right after this. So stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a new ruling coming out of North Carolina that might just force UNC and NC State to play App State, ECU, maybe Charlotte down the road, which I'm all in favor for, but definitely is getting pushback from UNC and NC State right about now, I bet. But let's get into a possible docu-series that could be coming to the SEC in 2024. And I'm all for it. It would just be incredible. There is a ton of stuff that will go into this, and nothing is necessarily set in stone, but it sounds like this is really coming to reality and probably will be something that we see at some point in the off-season after the year. Apologies, went to the entirely wrong slide there. But it's a really, really cool thing, and I think it's one of those Drive to Survive or Full Swing type documentaries that they've done in the past around F1 and the PGA Tour, and I think it'd just be incredible to watch. When you talk about the SEC, it's going to be a fun season. There's no two ways about that. There's so many different talking points going into this season, so many different ways that you can kind of spin this. Now, one of the big things that I am a little bit wary of at times is you have to opt in to do this. And there are a lot of coaches in the SEC that are a little bit guarded, or a little bit, don't want everyone in their party because they don't trust everyone that walks in that door. So guys like, Steve Sarkisian or Kirby Smart or Kalen DeBoer, they might be a little bit more wary of signing off and letting people with cameras walk into their locker room and film some of the things. But at the end of the day, if we are able to get a lot of access to some of these big-time teams, I think it's just going to be incredible. There's so many talking points. There's so much that goes into this year. And I think it starts with Texas and OU. Two teams coming into the conference of that caliber is always going to be a huge story. And especially with, Texas possibly gearing up to be the SEC champion, trying to, be one of the best teams in the league going forward, and definitely has a lot going for it going into this season. I think there's a ton to talk about there. And it'll be remarkable to see how those two teams adapt and then see that in real time on the docuseries, possibly sometime in the offseason. And then you have teams like Missouri, who are trying to come back from a historic season, trying to get to the top of the SEC, where they haven't been in quite some time. And there's a number of teams that absolutely could make that leap this year. I think Tennessee is in that conversation. I think Oklahoma is a team to definitely watch, to possibly shock some people with what they can do. So that'll be fascinating to watch. The big one is Alabama without Nick Saban, right? I think we all look at this SEC season, and it's going to be really weird when that first game rolls around and it's not Nick Saban on the sideline in the Crimson. So that'll be a very, very fascinating thing. We'll get to see kind of how Kalen DeBoer goes about it compared to how Nick Saban went about it, and I'm sure there's a lot of differences between the two. So that'll be fascinating to watch. Definitely something that I'm very much looking forward to. Florida struggling and going through one of the weirdest times that a Power 5 program has gone through in quite some time, where you're getting sued from one direction and you have the toughest schedule in the country in another direction, and there's so much stuff going on around Florida and Billy Napier that I think that one's going to be a very, very interesting talking point, and maybe they shock the world and make it even better a talking point by going like 9-3 or doing something crazy, which would be absolutely awesome. But Tennessee breaking in Nico Iamaleava is someone that I absolutely think would be a huge talking point around this, because he's someone that looks like the guy, right? Everything that we've seen from him has been pretty glowing. Everyone feels like he is a huge player for them going forward, and Tennessee's been waiting on that guy. It felt like Hendon Hooker might have been, and then the ACL tear totally kind of torpedoed that season for Tennessee fans, and definitely not what they wanted. But Nico is a absolute breath of fresh air. He's someone that can totally flip around what Tennessee has done. Now, is it going to be in 2024? I'm not exactly so sure, but in 2025, 26, whatever it looks like, he's going to be a big-time player, and it's going to, really benefit Tennessee when he does become that player. And I think Tennessee is going to be one of the very interesting conversations where, can they get back to being an SEC power? Can they get back to the front of the table and be a team that people, worry about when they're on their schedule, rather than a team that you feel pretty confident in no matter where you're playing them? At least that's the way it's been in the past. And then Ole Miss is one of the biggest things in college football right now. The hype going into this year around Lane Kiffin and the Rebels is one of those things where you don't get it very often. You don't have all these big-time transfers come in. You don't have a ton of the other things that have happened around Ole Miss and not have this remarkable amount of hype. Now, Lane Kiffin would call it rat poison. He would call it a number of different things. But the reality is, it's going to be an incredible thing to watch. And having Lane Kiffin at the center of it is about as good as you could ask for. So I think it's going to be an incredible thing to watch there. Georgia trying to get back up to the top and be the next Alabama. If they win a national title this year, it's going to be hard to sit there and say they don't have a shot to be that next team that dominates college football over the next decade and does just remarkable things. Now, it's going to be much harder to do than what Saban and Bama had to do, because the playoff is going to be bigger and winning national titles is going to take a little bit more. But the reality is, if a team's going to do it, it's going to be Georgia, and that would be the talking point of the entire docuseries if they went on to win a national title this upcoming year. And then you have the battle between the quarterbacks in this conference, between Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers, Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe, and just a ton more quarterbacks in this conference that are going to be incredible. There's going to be some really, really good matchups, and some of those guys are going to be battling for the number one spot in the 2025 draft. Tons of guys in the SEC have claim to that spot right now. I think Quinn Ewers has a shot. I think Carson Beck has a shot. I think James Pierce Jr. has a really good shot. Kelvin Banks, Will Campbell, among others, absolutely could make their way up into that number one spot in the 2025 draft, and that'll be a really, really remarkable storyline to watch throughout the season. And then there's always, that chance for a Jaden Daniels type figure to pop up out of nowhere. Now, I'm not exactly sure where that will come from. I don't know if there's anyone that necessarily fully jumps off the page to me as being that guy. Maybe Nico Iamaleava can be that guy, but I'm already watching him fairly closely, to be totally honest with you. So I think it's one of those things where we'll take college football any way we can get it. I think we can all agree on that. It's something that I'll take it, in May, I'll take it in June. I don't care. I just want as much college football as possible. So for me, when, this type of thing comes out and you hear about a possible docuseries or you hear about behind the scenes or that type of thing, I just absolutely eat it up. So I don't care necessarily when this comes out. I'm sure it'll be sometime in the offseason, as the PGA Tour and the Drive to Survive has done in the past. And so we'll know the outcomes of the games. We'll know who's going to win the whole thing. But there's still going to be incredible content in there. There's still going to be incredible behind-the-scenes stuff. And it's going to show us some of the stuff that goes on in the SEC that we might not fully know about right now. So I think it's just going to be incredible. I kind of hope they do it for every single conference, but I understand that is a very, very tough endeavor. But if this one goes really well, then maybe they'll expand that and go to different conferences and kind of make this a regular thing around college football. So for me, it's all about just, consuming as much college football content as possible, if I'm being totally honest with you. And if, Full Swing and Drive to Survive is any indication of what this will look like, I will absolutely be watching. They're going to be absolutely incredible storylines, incredible people to follow, maybe some sob stories at the end of the season, maybe some triumphant returns, maybe Ole Miss steals the show and wins a national title. So there's incredible things that can happen in this conference in particular, and I just cannot wait to see what all the behind the scenes are to this season that is coming up. But we'll take our final break here, and when we come back, we have a Hot Take Thursday for you guys, and we're going to get into the Big 12 and how I think some teams are going to get roughed up on their way to the conference title. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a docu-series possibly coming to Netflix around the SEC this upcoming year, and it would be a wild one to watch, that's for sure. Tons of very, very, very good talking points going into this season for the SEC, and I would absolutely be watching, that's for sure. But let's get into a Hot Take Thursday, and mine is the Big 12 champion will have at least 2 losses going into that game. Let's say coming out of that game. Let's just be... Well, I guess going into that game would be coming out of that game, but that's beside the point. The Big 12, in my opinion, is the most interesting conference in the entire country. I think between the new teams coming in, some of the quarterbacks that are going to be, really dominating that conference this upcoming year, but also just every single team feels like they have a shot. Now, not every team, but 10 of the 16 teams are plus 1,800 or better to win the conference. You have to go all the way down to Colorado to see a steep drop-off from West Virginia at 1,800. I believe it's Colorado at plus 4,000. So, obviously, a huge difference between those two, and it gives you an idea of what this conference is all about. There is not a team that is outright, bar anything better than everyone else. Utah is the team that kind of separates themselves from the pack, but even then, they have a lot of games on their schedule that could trip them up, especially in a conference that they haven't played in before. So I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. It's one of those things that whenever you can get a great season out of a conference that might not get as much love as some of the others, it's always a great thing. We saw it with the Pac-12 a year ago, where a lot of people, were focusing on the SEC and the Big Ten and all of that jazz, but the Pac-12 came out and had probably the best year it's had in quite some time, maybe ever. So it's going to be incredible to watch. I think this conference might just be the one that if you got nothing to do, or if there's nothing on late on a Saturday, or if you're just looking for a good game to watch, tune into a Big 12 game, and somehow you're going to get a close game. I can almost promise you that. Now, a lot of this does have to do with some of the out-of-conference games that these teams are going to be playing. There are not easy schedules across the Big 12 in conference, but out of conference, you have Kansas State's got to play at Tulane, and they have Arizona out of conference for some reason. I guess it was scheduled before they joined the conference and didn't want to necessarily change that up. So that's a very interesting one. Obviously, I think both those teams are pretty happy that's not a conference game because it doesn't affect their chances to make the conference title game, but it will still give us a really good idea of what this conference looks like in 2024. Utah plays Baylor out of conference, so that's another one that's really weird, but definitely will be a very, very interesting one to watch there. Oklahoma State plays Arkansas, Kansas plays Illinois and UNLV, Iowa State always gets Iowa. So there's not a lot of easy out-of-conference games for these teams. Now, likely the majority of those games should be won by the Big 12 team, but it's not a layup by any means. That Oklahoma State-Arkansas game is one I'm watching very closely because at face value, at least from where I'm standing, Oklahoma State is the better team. They have a lot of veteran leadership. They have the quarterback coming back. They have a lot of really good things over there, while Arkansas has not so many steady things over there, although I think Taven Green's going to be absolutely incredible this upcoming year. But it's one of those games that I think is going to be fascinating to watch, and I think will give you an idea of what's the gap between these two conferences. If Arkansas walks into Stillwater and beats Oklahoma State, it's going to be a weird conversation. Let's put it that way. People are going to, really, really go into the SEC is so much far ahead of these rest of these conferences, and you might as well break off. And there will be some bad conversations happening. Let's just put it that way. But then when you get into the conference schedule, it doesn't get much easier. This conference is going to be really hardly fought, and there's a number of teams that might not, make it to Arlington, might not be the team that wins the entire thing, but they could be the thorn in the side of some teams that really want to win the entire thing. I think the two that I'm looking at really closely are Texas Tech and TCU. Both these teams technically have a shot to win the title, and I think Texas Tech is a very, very interesting one to watch, frankly. But both those teams could absolutely beat anyone in the conference. There's not a team in this conference that is entirely going to outweigh that team where you can just walk in and pen in a win and just move forward on your day. So I think Texas Tech and TCU are going to be hard matchups no matter where you get them. And a lot of teams get them, at Texas Tech or at TCU, which is not ideal by any means. And then you have Colorado and UCF, two teams that, are on the outside looking in, have a very, very hard path to get to a conference title and possibly win it, although Dion has promised that for Colorado for some reason. But they're going to be teams that are going to be hard outs, and they're going to be teams that are going to make life not easy on you. UCF is one of those teams where if you have to travel to Central Florida to play that team, there's a chance that they beat you. I know Utah has to do it at some point in the season, and that one's a little bit worrisome. I think if you're watching any game in the Utah season as one that could trip them up, that might be the one. And then Colorado has every chance to use that ability, play a really, really good game, and possibly knock off one of these teams. And then you get into kind of the teams that could make this prediction entirely incorrect. And I think you start with Utah. That's probably the easiest path to make this prediction not true because they don't necessarily have the most aggressive out-of-conference schedule. They don't necessarily play the big-time teams. Now, at Baylor is not going to be an easy game by any means, but they should win that and keep it moving. But I think it's going to be a very, very fascinating thing to watch, and there's still games on that schedule that are really worrisome. They invite Arizona into Utah during the year. They go to Oklahoma State, which is an atmosphere that a lot of people are not prepared for when they walk in. Let's just put it that way. If that's a night game, then Utah has their work cut out for them because for some reason it just gets a little bit darker in Stillwater around that time of year, but that's besides the point. Kansas State, is another team to watch that could separate itself from the pack. The out-of-conference being at Tulane, at Colorado, or having at Tulane out of conference, and then going to Colorado, Iowa State, more teams in the conference. It's not going to be easy. There's going to be teams that trip them up, and Kansas State is a team that has, two remarkable playmakers and has a really good foundation around it, but it's not necessarily going to just outright overpower teams or outright out-talent teams throughout this schedule. So that's going to be fascinating to watch. I think the Big 12, from where I'm standing, is not only the most interesting, not only the most tightly fought, but the most confusing conference in the entire country. I think where I'm leaning right now is Utah will likely win this conference, but there's like 4 different teams that I'm rotating in and out of Arlington right now, and there might just be 5 by the end of the offseason. So it's not an easy conference to pin down, and I think that lends itself to a little bit of chaos, kind of like what we saw last year, really. Texas was the only one that, kind of curbed a lot of the worries that a lot of the other teams had, or a lot of the hurdles that a lot of the teams got tripped up on. Texas was barely able to clear. That Houston game was fairly sketchy. The TCU game, the exact same. So there's some of these games that definitely tripped up teams a year ago, and I think this year it's only going to get more tightly fought. I think these teams are only getting closer and closer together in terms of talent. I think Utah is the team that I would separate from the pack just a little bit, but everyone else, there's about 6 or 7 teams right there that are going to be in the same realm, that are going to be fighting for kind of the same spot. So when you talk about Kansas State, Kansas, Arizona, Oklahoma State, those are teams that absolutely could make a run and be a team that maybe goes 11-1, maybe makes the conference title game and wins that and goes to the playoff. But then there's also Colorado, Houston, West Virginia, UCF that maybe won't make that big time run, but they could ruin the run for someone else. So it's a very fascinating conference. I think there's going to be so many different things that go into this, but also one of the big things that I kind of want to touch on shortly here is, what if this does happen? What if we do have a 2-loss conference champion going into that week, and you have, say, 2 10-2 teams walking into Arlington, a better hypothetical here. Let's say you have 1-11 team, a 11-1 Utah against a 10-2 Kansas State. Let's just put that out there, and Kansas State wins that game. Are we confident that Utah would get in? Because I understand they went to their conference title game. I know that they would be 11-2. I know that they would have good wins over Tulane and some other teams on their schedule, or not Tulane, but they would have some really good wins on their schedule. The reality is, I don't know if that outweighs a 3-loss or even a 4-loss SEC or Big Ten team, if I'm being totally honest. And maybe it should. I think there's a real reality where Utah might be the better team, but when you look at, say, a 3-loss Ole Miss team this year, if they lose to, Georgia and Alabama and LSU, I don't know if I can make the argument that 11-2 Utah team is outright better than the 9-3 Ole Miss team. So it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch. I think someone's going to have to separate themselves, and maybe 2 teams will have to separate themselves if they want a multi-bid league, because that's going to be a really, really sketchy proposition in this league this upcoming year. I think it's going to be an absolute fight, and I think there's not going to be a lot of games where you can just pen in a win, you can just move on and feel very confident going into that game, because not only, are these teams so packed together, but a lot of the teams are different than what you faced in the past. Utah's never faced UCF. They haven't faced Oklahoma State at Oklahoma State. So there's some of these games that are going to trip them up that we might not expect. So I absolutely love this conference. I'll be totally honest with you. It's my favorite conference in the entire country going into this year because of this, because I think it's going to be so weird, because I think it's going to be off the walls, and I think there's going to be no team that comes out unscathed. So I cannot wait for this, season to kick off, for these teams to start to really get into this fight. And once they do, I think it's going to be a little bit of a bloodbath. It'll be really, really fun to watch, and definitely be one that we'll have to be watching down to the very, very last week. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for every content and update you could possibly need in the world of sports. We have incredible people doing work across every single sport you could think of. So if you need anything, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.